And you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2, and we are on the campus of the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is part of our university series where we visit universities and we talk with professors who are also authors. Now joining us is Maurie McInnis, whose book is called Slaves Waiting for Sale, Abolitionist Art and the American Slave Trade. Professor McInnis, who is Eyre Crow? Who was Eyre Crow?
Eyre Crow was a young British artist who came to America in the 1850s and saw an event he was in many ways unprepared for. He wandered down to Richmond, Virginia's slave auction rooms and there beheld an auction of humans for the first time. And he became captivated by this subject and painted a number of images and published a number of drawings in the Illustrated London News in order to help raise awareness about American slavery.
Was he anti-slavery? Was he an abolitionist?
I would suspect when he first came to America, he was aware of the anti-slavery movement and would have described himself as being opposed to slavery. But after coming here and witnessing American slavery and witnessing the slave auctions, he then later described himself as an abolitionist. Now, he was not a politically active abolitionist. It was not that he was a member of any of these many organizations that existed in Britain even after the end of British slavery, but he was writing and publishing images that in many ways were as important as the activism of those who were politically involved.
Why did he come to the States in the first place?
Yeah, it's one of those fun little stories of the 19th century. The British novelist William Makepeace Thackery, who was second only to Charles Dickens in popularity, wonderfully beloved by Americans, was on a 6-month speaking tour. And Eyre Crow's father was a good friend of Thackeray's, and so he invited his, best friend's younger son to come along and serve as his traveling companion and secretary. But Eyre Crow was also at that point already a very highly trained artist, though he was only in his early 20s. So as he went around with Thackeray, traveling up and down the eastern seaboard, he made reservations and he traveled with Thackeray and he made sure all the lodgings were taken care of and the lecture rooms were taken care of, but he also sketched the whole way that he was traveling. And he and Thackeray differed quite significantly on their impression of slavery in America. Thackeray decided that he was not going to speak publicly on the topic because 10 years earlier, Charles Dickens had come to America and famously pretty much excoriated Americans about slavery. And in his book on Notes on America, he had a whole chapter against slavery. And it had hurt his sales in America after that. And so Thackeray remained mum on the topic. In his letters, though...
For commercial reasons.
For commercial reasons. But in his letters, though, you also get a sense that he was pretty patrician in his views. And he did not exactly see it as all that bad, and definitely not something that a British author ought to opine about.
What is this painting on the front of your book?
This painting is the culminating statement that Eyre Crow made against American slavery. Its title was Slaves Waiting for Sale, Richmond, Virginia, and it was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1861. And that alone is a remarkable thing. The Royal Academy, the premier institution for exhibiting works of art in the 19th century English-speaking world, wasn't typically a political institution. Most of the works of art that were accepted for exhibition were expected to not be too extreme in one way or another. Don't go too far about a social statement. Don't be too far in being artistically innovative. You pretty much had to find a middle line in order to be accepted. And there had been very few pictures exhibited at the Royal Academy that featured people of African descent. There had been some, there were certainly some over the preceding couple of decades, but not many at all. And this was not just a picture featuring somebody of African descent, but it was a clearly political statement opposed to American slavery. And in one of those rather amazing coincidences of history, the exhibition opened May 7th, 1861, and the first shots had just been fired on Fort Sumter only a few weeks previously. So when the exhibition opened in early May, all of London was a-twitter about the war in the US. And of course, all of London was also talking about what role should the United Kingdom take in the American war. There were many in Britain very much in favor of supporting the Confederate States of America because of the amount of money that Britain made from American cotton. There were, of course, many opposed to that as well. And we all know that ultimately Britain remained neutral. But at that moment, on May 7th, 1861, no one really knew what was going to happen.
Were there slaves in Great Britain at that time?
No, slavery had been abolished in Britain and its colonies, officially ending in 1838. So it had been a long time since Britain had been directly involved with slavery. But Britain was really the place where anti-slavery movements began, and they remained quite involved after the ending of British slavery in trying to end the rest of world slavery. And of course, U.S. slavery was not the end of slavery in the world either. It continued in Brazil, in Cuba, until long after American slavery ended.
Professor McInnis, as an art historian, walk us through this painting on the front of your book.
Yeah, so what I try to do in the book is do exactly that, to walk viewers through the painting, to reconstruct the material world of the American slave trade that Eyre Crow would have seen when he visited the Richmond slave rooms on March 3rd, 1853. And I try to reconstruct what the lived experience would have been for African Americans who were caught up in the trade. In the decades between 1820 and 1860, it is estimated that more than 350,000 slaves were sold from the Upper South, taken away from their families and those they love, and sent hundreds, if not thousands of miles away to the booming Cotton South, to the states of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And so this book tries to tell the story of that experience for those individuals. What I was able to do, and what's really kind of fun, I think, about the book is readers can go on a journey with Eyre Crow, starting at the hotel where he stayed in Richmond, where he woke up that morning, picked up Richmond newspapers, and was astonished to see advertised there in the upper corner, people for sale. It was something he had never experienced before. Richmond was the first southern city he visited.
Is that what got him to go walk to the slave market?
Well, he was primed for that because when he was in New York City, he had bought a copy of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin that had just been released at the end of 1852. And he read the novel and writes that he was harrowed by its contents. It horrified him, this story of American slavery. And he was particularly attracted to the slave trade, the commercial aspect of slavery, this selling of humans from one to another. And he was determined when he got to a southern city to witness this aspect of slavery himself. So on his first morning, he opens the newspaper at his hotel and sees there several advertisements for the auction of slaves. And he asks somebody working at the hotel, who was probably an enslaved man himself, where these sales were located. They were just a few blocks away from his hotel, just a few blocks away from Thomas Jefferson's Virginia State Capitol building, this great symbolic image of representational democracy. And 3 blocks away, people were being sold day in and day out, every day, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Thousands of people annually sold from Richmond, most of whom were then sent to places south. So the reader can go on that same journey with Crow. I did research in deeds and commercial directories and so forth in order to reconstruct what businesses he would have walked past, to understand where the slave trade took place and where it was in relation to the city's other businesses, its industries, its retail establishments, its churches, its civic institutions, and its state buildings. None of them are very far removed, and yet the slave trade was tucked away in Richmond. It was not a district you would go to.